Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is what we mean by strategic planning, what are the key steps in the strategic planning process. So what is strategic planning? What's different about it from strategic thinking? Strategic planning is a process of defining strategy or direction and making decisions on allocating resources to pursue this strategy. Ultimately, this is about drawing distinctions between realities and objectives, is at the heart of this whole strategic planning process. So this is the real reality check now, to start off with. There are always going to be various options for bridging the gap between the current situation and the desired objective. And you started to do that because you've been starting to prioritise. But now it has to go into a much more political arena. So, we're now in strategic planning rather than strategic thinking. And there are 4 steps that I put in here. And if we go on to the next slide, I can put them up. So, firstly, we've got this whole area around national and regional consultation. So this is where all the information that you've developed as a SAP development team then goes out into the national arena for mainly national consultation, although there may be some regional consultation there as well. From that, it's about how are we going to implement, what are the implementation strategies for all of this, all of this material that's going to make up the SAP. Then it's all about effective strategic actions, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. And then finally it's about drafting the SAP. They're the 4 key steps here. So, national and regional consultation processes, that's the first one. That's where we are here. So, what we're going to talk about here is what is the purpose of the consultation process, something about economic analysis of options and alternatives, a little bit about political and social analysis of options and alternatives, and then some advice from the field, some useful advice. So what's the purpose of this consultation process? The previous steps in the SAP development process were spent on selecting ideas and prioritising them. That's where we've got to. These were purposely described as options or alternatives and not decisions. None of this is a decision at the moment. They're all ideas that have become options or alternatives for decision makers. Now, all countries involved in the process are at liberty to propose additional solutions or discount those coming from the SAP development team. So this is going to go back to decision makers in the country. They can say, we don't agree with these, it's their right to do so, or they might equally say, we want to add in other things. But it's putting this very much into a political dimension, and it's giving the decision makers all of the materials to be able to make those decisions. But you never know, they might actually say they like some of it. So, what is the purpose of the consultation process? The steps involve each country reviewing the outputs of the strategic thinking process and conducting a thorough evaluation of the feasibility of these alternatives from a national perspective. So, are these alternatives feasible from a national perspective? And equally, there might then also be a feasibility study about how feasible they are from a regional perspective as well. We're talking about nationally. In particular, the countries should examine how feasible the options alternatives are from an economic, a political and a social perspective. Are they economically feasible? Are they politically acceptable? And are they socially acceptable? So, obviously there's going to be some kind of economic, or hopefully there will be some form of economic analysis of the options alternatives. And the economic analysis should be based on objective information and widely used techniques. However, just by doing an economic analysis should not be seen as contributing a decision. The economic analysis provides only one form of input into the policymakers' final decision. You should also be looking at political and social feasibility or acceptability. So from an economic point of view, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because this is way outside my field, but there are essentially three ways that you can actually, probably more than, but I've got three ways here of understanding the economics of particular options. One is to look at cost effectiveness. How cost effective? It's the most basic. What are the costs and what are the benefits? And that's all we're sort of saying. Which ones do we think are most cost effective? The second approach is to do cost-benefit analysis, and many governments, many organisations do cost-benefit analysis. It's a very, very mature kind of technique of analysing the costs and benefits. And the third way of doing it, and this is probably most appropriate in many respects for LMEs, is to carry out an economic valuation of goods and services. So this is assigning monetary or quantitative values to goods and services or the environmental resources and whether or not market prices are available to assist the process. So this is actually about putting a value on the environmental goods and services. So that's three ways it can be done. Now, obviously, in each country, there's going to need to be a discussion about this, and there's going to have to be some, I would imagine, some considerable help if we're going to go down this route, because this is actually not so mature, but will obviously produce ultimately the best result. It's very likely that this is going to be the route that most countries will take by doing cost-benefit analysis. But again, there might need to be help and advice for at a national level to be actually able to carry out this. So it's very likely that this whole economic analysis will need to be done by a consultant in the country, so the whole of the cost-benefit analysis or the whole of the economic valuation of goods and services for each of those options is outlined, so that that can then be presented to the final decision maker. Of course, the decision maker is going to do this. Okay? Is everybody okay with this? There are actually some examples of good practice on this, particularly for LMEs. The South China Sea project in 2008 produced a regional economic values cost-benefit analysis of SAP actions. It's in their strategic action programme, and my guess is that somewhere there's a lot more information around this that could actually be taken to help if this project wanted to develop cost-benefit analysis nationally for the potential options in SAP. So that's one example I've got that's actually very good. So from a social and political perspective, in parallel to the economic feasibility analysis, it's probably very useful to ensure social and political acceptability of each option. And again, this is necessary both regionally and nationally. So again, it's very likely that the project will need to hire in a consultant for each country to assess how feasible or how acceptable these solutions are from a political and social perspective. There's quite a lot of work here. Why do we want to do this particular step? Well, at regional level, an option might not be particularly attractive to a specific country. So, looking at it from a regional perspective, one country might say, "This is not. I don't like this idea." But when it weighed against the complex political agenda that characterises bilateral or multilateral relationships, this may constitute important bargaining chip. So this is about, we're now in the process of political deals. So this is actually important that there's a good understanding of regional relationships. So this understanding of the political acceptability of options, the social acceptability of options, and how the regional relationships are will really help in ensuring that you get the right balance of solutions in the SAP. At national level, options may directly affect a specific sector or community, or may entail adding responsibility to certain government agencies. So some of these solutions or options that we've developed might actually put a lot more responsibility onto certain organisations. Also, some stakeholders may be directly impacted by an option, both positively and negatively, and they will need to be consulted to make sure that they feel that this is a good thing. So that you can see there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. So it's not a small task if it's done effectively. So in terms of some advice from the field, I've mentioned this a couple of times now. Is there a risk that SAP will be perceived as a wish list during this process? If it's perceived as being a wish list, then it's not going to go very far. Make sure the focus is on the priority issues and try not to present shopping lists. That's why what we've been doing is so critically important. Because if it's perceived that you've put a lot of time and effort into this, and you can substantiate the reasons for these options, they're going to be much more favourably received. If they're just a list of things, people are just going to say, well, I can't do that, I've got no information on that. So it's important that you don't just create wish lists. How will the project convince finance, planning and development ministries to invest? How are you going to get this, these different ministries, these very important ministries, to invest in this? Prioritisation on the basis of based on the economic valuation of goods and services in particular can help these ministries as they will start to see a return on their investment. It's the same in the sense of cost-benefit analysis. If they can see a return on their investment, because it looks like you've done your sums correctly, again, it's good for the SAP. And how important is private sector civil society commitment for a given option? Without commitment from, let's say, the private sector, for a given option that's going to affect the private sector, it won't go anywhere. Equally, if civil society, if artisanal fisher folk are involved in one of the options, and they haven't been properly involved in the process, then it's not going to go anywhere again. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, unless people feel that they're going to get some benefit out of it, or that they've been treated with some form of respect, they're not going to get involved. So it's fundamentally important. Do key stakeholder representatives have a clear understanding of the process, in particular of the given options developed during the strategic thinking phase? Do they know what they're letting themselves in for? So again, this is at the national level. Do the governments know what they're letting themselves in for? Do other stakeholders? Do people on the ground that are going to actually have to bear the consequences of many of these options? Do they know what they're letting themselves in for? Do stakeholder groups understand the potential benefits and or costs of a specific option?